Jim Gray is a 12-time Emmy Award winner. He's a Hall of Fame journalist who's been involved in some of the greatest sporting events of all time. The Super Bowl, the World Series, NBA Finals, NCAA Final Fours, the Masters, over 1,200 boxing matches, including the most recent Mike Tyson, Roy Jones Jr. fight. His new book is entitled Talking to Goats. Let's welcome in Jim Gray. It's great to see you.
Pete, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Now that I went through all your accomplishments, we're out of time, Jim. I'm sorry. Let's talk about the fight on Saturday night. First of all, YouTuber Jake Paul, that knockout on Nate Robinson. Wow.
Can't go in there fooling around. Now, Nate Robinson is a great athlete. Obviously, he's a three-time NBA slam dunk champion, played in the league for a decade. But you can't lead with your head. You can't think that you're just going to learn boxing because your dad knew Mike Tyson and had a tie to Muhammad Ali.
Right.
That's not what this is. And that was a heck of a shot. And Jake Paul wants to be a fighter. This is what he decided he wants to dedicate himself to. So he's trying to learn the craft. It's only his second fight. We'll see where it goes. But you can't go against a guy who's dedicating himself to that and then just say, well, you know what? I can make a lot of three-pointers and I can drive the lane and I can get hit by an NBA guy and go down on the floor. That's nothing like getting punched in the face.
Mike Tyson, Roy Jones Jr. Give me your thoughts on that fight.
I thought it was terrific. I thought, really, really awesome display by Mike Tyson. To be 54 years old, to have lost 100 pounds, Pete, to come in the ring in that kind of condition, that kind of shape, after not really, he has not had, look, he quit. His last interview that he had done in the ring was with me, and he said, I just don't have this in me anymore. I don't have this ferocious animal instinct, and I can't do this anymore. Those were his words, something to that effect. And to be on the shelf for 15 years and given up that portion of your life, to be able to come and do that and to show those moves and to have that timing. And he didn't try and hit Roy Jones Jr. in the face, but he hit him several times in the ribs. And I think it was Snoop Dogg had some great lines that night. He said, give me a little sauce on them ribs, please, Mr. Tyson. It was a fun night in the middle of a pandemic.
I absolutely loved it. A few observations. Number one, Tyson looked like the Tyson of old. I mean, he went on the attack, and I'm like, oh my gosh, because you remember back in the day when he was the heavyweight champ, he would run after his opponent. I felt like I saw a little bit of that Saturday night. Roy Jones Jr. maybe ate a little bit too much during Thanksgiving dinner, but still looked okay, and he tied Mike up during the fight, which absolutely worked. But the standout for me was Snoop Dogg. He was so good as a boxing commentator, Jim.
He was fantastic. I mean, he had some great lines. Plus, he knows what he's saying. I mean, Snoop has been around boxing. He's obviously a huge Lakers fan, big Raiders fan. Great job on the commentary, and obviously his music is loved by millions and millions of people.
We're talking with Jim Gray. The book is called Talking to Goats. Now, tell me about your relationship with Tom Brady. First of all, I got to ask you this. Is it true that once Tom decided to leave the Patriots, he narrowed it down to three teams, Tampa Bay, the Chargers, and the Chicago Bears? So we were in consideration here in Chicago?
Absolutely. Very much so. He was very, very impressed with Coach Nagy and liked the organization. Obviously, there's a tremendous tradition in Chicago. Ultimately, what it boiled down to, though, was geography, okay? He has a son, Jack, who lives in New York, who would come to all the games, or at least a lot of the weekends up in Boston.
Right.
And to go out to the West Coast and to Los Angeles, even though his parents are from California, Northern California, and he has sisters in Southern California and so forth, it was just going to be too hard on his son, Jack. Plus, Giselle has family in Costa Rica, and she's from Brazil. That's much shorter from the East Coast and from Florida to see them. So the proximity and family played a huge role in this. But the Bears were down into the very, very final days and the very short straws. And also, I think these are my assessments from what I know. You'd probably have to ask Tom exactly what else. But I would also say he spent 20 years in freezing cold in New England. So when your choice comes to Los Angeles, Southern California, Tampa, and Florida, or going to Soldier Field and being frozen however many games and having a guaranteed date in Green Bay, I think he'd had enough of the weather too. So
That makes so much sense. Do you want the 50-mile-an-hour winds off the lake with a wind chill of about 20 below playing at Soldier Field or Tampa? Gosh, that's a tough decision.
But it was a factor at the end, and I think that
Well,
obviously
sure.
Tampa's going to win that portion of it.
Well, tell me about Brady. Does the guy eat junk food? I mean, if I see a bag of Cheetos, I'm going to eat Cheetos. I don't see Tom Brady doing that or drinking a beer on the weekends.
He's very committed to health and nutrition and the TB12 method and the book that he wrote, and he lives that. And he says to me this all the time, and I don't think I put this in the book, in the Talking to Goats book, but I could have, and I should have. He says, if all you ever do is all you've ever done, then all you'll ever get is all you've ever gotten, or all you'll ever be is all you've ever been. So in other words, if you're going to just do the same thing over and over and over again, if you're going to keep eating all of this junk food, then you wonder why you're fat or wonder why you don't feel good, diabetes and so forth, then all you're going to be is all you've ever been. What he has said is, I'm trying to be a great athlete. He's trying to show you a different way, a better way, a way that can work and facilitate.
Talk to me about your relationship with Kobe. You two are great friends. When I mention his name, what sticks out to you most?
Sadness. I still grieve and mourn that. It's still hard to comprehend. I don't want that to be my thought of Kobe. I want to be able to smile and laugh at all the good times that we had, all the great memories that we shared, all the joy that he gave to everybody. But we're still under a year, Pete, and it's still really fresh. So we're still early in that. If I was to try and take a bigger global picture of it, I would just say, here was a guy that was just so competitive, and he patterned his entire life after that great man who played in the Chicago Bulls uniform, Michael Jordan, and who can forget how Michael spoke at Kobe's memorial when he said this was a little brother, and sometimes your little brother pesters you, but you just love him so much that you give him everything you can, and the relationship that they had. So, Kobe wanted to be like Mike. Kobe wanted to be the greatest basketball player in the history of the game. And he was myopic in that vision. And if you were in his way, Pete, he would get you out of the way. And it didn't matter if you were an opponent, a member of the media, a teammate, a coach, whatever it was, he was going to do whatever he thought he had to do to win. And that was the goal.
Jim Gray, Talking to Goats. I want to get to a few more interviews before you go. Muhammad Ali, the most recognizable face on the planet at the time. I want you to tell me about the night you were friends where he lit the torch at the Olympics in Atlanta. How special was that?
That's the greatest moment I've seen in sports, was that evening. I was doing the broadcast for NBC, and nobody knew who was going to light the torch except for Billy Payne and Muhammad and Lonnie Ali and Dick Ebersol, who was my boss. I believe Dick had the idea and presented it to the Atlanta Olympic Organizing Committee, and Billy Payne finally agreed and was convinced that it should be. Billy Payne originally wanted, believe it or not, Evander Holyfield, who was the local hero and who had been heavyweight champion of the world, and Ali got the nod. And when he came out there that night, Pete, there for the grace of God. Here was a man, fragile, changed, compromised somewhat by the Parkinson's that had set in. And he raised that torch. And what you saw in that moment was courage, dignity, humanity, humility, greatness, personified. That was a great moment. The only thing that even remotely compared to me was when President Bush threw out the first pitch at
After
Yankee
9/11.
Stadium. And so both of those moments, it's kind of interesting. We're at sporting events, but weren't achieved by athletes, at least current athletes who were in the arena.
Finally, I got to ask you about Pete Rose. Walk me through the Pete Rose interview. He makes the all-century team, standing ovation, first time on the field in 10 years. You grab him and you talk to him, and what happened?
Well, it was the first time that Pete had been allowed back out on the field after signing away his own banishment for 10 years. And MasterCard had taken over the ceremony, so they had held a vote. And with that vote, Major League Baseball lost control of the ceremony. So it was an all-century team as voted by the fans. And there was just a soft place and a melancholy feeling in everybody's heart And then you have the cymbals and the trumpets and everything going and the music. And so everybody's feeling really good. It's taking them back to a place that they love about baseball. Well, I was watching this from the Yankees dugout, and I should have been watching it on television. As my boss, Dick Ebersol, pointed out a couple of days later, it was a much different feeling watching it on television and receiving it than watching it in the stadium where it was taking place in shallow center field just beyond second base. And you couldn't hear it or feel it as well, other than the ovation for Rose, and which was rousing. I mean, was huge. And Hank Aaron, who was the home run king and obviously played in Atlanta. So when he came over to do the interview with that backdrop, I then come on and start asking all these questions about gambling. And it just careened out of control and, you know, kept going down. And Pete obviously wasn't going to be forthright and admit it. He was still lying about it.
He kept denying it. And he looked like he was going to punch you in the face.
Never had that feeling. But in fact, he walked away, Pete. He shook my hand. Pete Rose and I shook hands. Yeah. There was no problem right then. And, you know, we just did an interview after 21 years. Fox allowed me to have a special for Talking to Goats for the book. So I thought, you know, with this Talking to Goats special, that maybe I should call Pete and see if he wanted to participate. Well, he said yes right away. I went over to Vegas. We taped an interview for an hour at the Bellagio Hotel. And he said I was just doing my job, and that he said he felt that if he came clean and told the truth, that it was guaranteed that he would never have a life in baseball again. And he said, I had young kids to feed. I'd been doing this since I was 8 years old. I think he said I was now 47 or 48 years old. He said, how was I going to feed my family? So it was better for me to just lie, thinking they didn't have the evidence. Turns out they had the evidence. And, you know, I made a huge mistake, but you were just doing your job. And the upshot of it was, I asked him the final question, Pete. I said, do you still bet on baseball? He said, yeah, I do. I haven't this year, but I still do bet on baseball.
Wow.
With the caveat, he said, now I bet legally, no longer illegally. Everything I bet is through a casino.
Does he belong in the Hall of Fame, Pete Rose?
I think what has to be weighed here is we don't live in the Soviet Union, Pete. Okay, a man's records are a man's records. You just don't wipe them out. So I would say this, first of all, let those who make the vote, vote. Let the senior committee vote. And let them weigh if a man's accomplishments in baseball outweigh what was his lack of integrity toward the game. Okay? No gambling. And by virtue of his banishment, he did gamble. And now admits it and admitted it in his book. Let them decide. If I had a vote, my vote would be yes, Pete Rose is a Hall of Fame player.
And before you go, I got to mention we have a mutual friend here in Chicago, Corey Mcferrin from Fox 32. How do you know Corey?
Corey helped me tremendously when I was a very, very young guy. I was a videotape editor at KBTV Channel 9 in Denver, and Corey came in as the weekend sports anchor. And I had been an intern there and had just graduated from my internship. And I'm just going to say this, Corey mentored me. He helped me tremendously. He was such a good guy, and he was so gracious. I love Corey, and he's always been there for me, and I would do anything I could for him.
Jim Gray, the book is entitled Talking to Goats. It's available everywhere. Jim, really a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Pete, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.